Good evening. How are you? Well, we're sitting and talking because it's 100 degrees outside. And, it's long enough. I can't tell that I'd be affected by it, but we try to be careful when we can. And so that's where we are today. And the heat that's outside is as much a metaphor for where America is. Day by day, we have these emergencies that are unexplained except for the fact that they're all part and parcel of a plan for Trump to govern America without answering to anyone else. This is an old Federalist belief system, actually. And we'll talk about that a little bit, I think. And Trump is off the mark. His car is driven off into the woods because, ironically or not, everybody is concerned about the sex rings, about the Epstein scandal. And so Trump looks for anything else to talk about. He goes to Scotland to look at golf courses. A poor excuse. Eisenhower apparently was criticized once for doing so much golf. So we go from one Republican to this bizarre Republican and for many of us, our own lifetime. Now, Trump says Obama owes me. Well, he says that Trump owes him because the Supreme Court granted Trump immunity, so Obama has that. Like Obama wants that, needs that, whatever, invoke it. ABC's The View, and observing this faux debate or discussion, said that Obama is everything Trump is not. Obama is trim, smart, handsome, happily married, and he can sing. The jury's out on that portion. There's a rumor that Trump hopes to put an end to The View. See it? Like what happened with 60 Minutes, they constrain the editorial policy, a high-level person leaves. Colbert speaks the truth about a merger involving quid pro quos with the president in order to get the merger approved, and also apparently provided that somebody kicks Colbert off the air. And they've succeeded at that by May, if Colbert doesn't continue to fight so hard and prompt them to kneecap him earlier rather than later. The censorship in America is extreme, outside of control. It actually brings to mind what John Adams and Hamilton did back in their time. But let me talk about what the First Amendment says and then lay it side by side with what was happening in the early Federalists as compared to now. In fact, the same provision is being quoted. Our First Amendment says, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, of the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. All of those things have been violated in recent days, and people scratch their heads saying, can they do this? Can they do this? And the thing that is so upsetting is that we don't make people pay for violating the law. It's just, oh yeah, the First Amendment's out there. Congress doesn't bring a lawsuit. Individuals don't bring a lawsuit. The ACLU doesn't bring a lawsuit. And as I'm talking to you, they're probably trying to figure out how they can get Trump out of the Epstein mess by keeping Maxwell, who was at the pinnacle of this terrible conspiracy, abusing children, acting as predators. And so now, having had a government that did not want to talk to her because her crime was so severe and outrageous, now we have Trump's defense counsel in the Justice Department talking to Maxwell, perhaps to get any little information, but not against Trump, mark my words. And so what we have is people responding, citizens responding. And they're responding because of this thing I've said before. If you tear down all the laws in the land, can you stand in the wind that would blow? And the answer is no, you can't. And that's what's happening now. That's why we see demonstrations. That's why we're going to see people being disobedient, if you will, and taking on the penalties for their minor crimes as compared to what our, quote, government is doing, which is populated by, for, and exists only to take care of the elite, not us. Now, in South Parks, which is a show that does one of the most hilarious set of attacks on Trump or anybody else for that matter. I'm sure it's traveling the world and people are watching it. And the question is, was South Park's too direct, too accurate, and will it be the next target for the tender feelings of the Orange Oath when it comes to the First Amendment? Now, the seeds of the division we now suffer were planted even in Jefferson's time, and in part by his own conduct. The structure of our society back in 1787, it was the plantation. It was race prejudice was acceptable, was the rule. And Jefferson was himself a slave owner. Now, there's another layer of this about those periods and what was going on. Now, Charles Beard, who was pressured heavily to withdraw his analysis, heaven help us that we play with the myths of America and not believe in some sort of saintly tradition that just doesn't exist among people who live and are real and know in this short coil which we exist on this earth. It's the imperfections, which and sometimes are the beauties of life and how we handle them. Charles Beard wrote The Economic Interpretation of the Constitution, and he favored the interpretation that it was the dominant who seek to continue their economic progress. That's at yours and mine disadvantage, and insists thereby that they should be able to control the government. Now, Beard studied the 55 men who wrote our Constitution in 1787. Business, all tied to business. Not everyone, but most of them. And so they had a mindset that was about perpetuating themselves. And no landowners, no women, certainly no slaves were permitted into this discussion. And in fact, the entire proceedings of the Constitution were sealed for, I think it was 40 years after that, before the notes of those in attendance were made public. So, and there was no Bill of Rights attached to the Constitution when it came out of the cooker in Philadelphia. Now, our government took care of the elite, but in the original, but it also started taking care of small property owners and middle income working people. And over time, we know that it took a civil war to have some notion of equality, and we gave rights to slaves before women in 1920 could vote. So our First Amendment, which is a cause for emphasis because it is our key to open an endangered democracy for all the people. Speech, the First Amendment to the Constitution. Speech to run against the government when they're doing wrong and to tell them that. And so how do they answer it? When they can't answer it, they put you in jail. And in 1798, John Adams and the Federalists passed the Sedition Act to shut up the disagreeable. And there were international questions about how we dealt with France and how we dealt with Great Britain, but it became a really terrible thing, and people were arrested, and some were actually incarcerated. So that was what was going on, and that is what Trump wants to do now. Now, footnote, although relevant, pertinent, is that John Adams only won one term, and the consensus so many years later, if we had Carville, we could ask him back then, I guess, is what do the people think of it? The people hated it. And that's why they kicked him out of government. And he was so upset by it, the night before the inauguration of Jefferson, he left the Capitol, and he wasn't there. He just went away. So somewhat like what Trump did when Biden won. Now, when I graduated from law school, Arthur Miller had worked with our Columbia Human Rights Law Review as the managing editor on privacy issues. So we got to know him a little bit. But one of his studies during that period was what's going on with voters. How are they affected by this? What do they think about all this? And he came to the conclusion that there was a widespread basic discontent and political alienation in America. Now, let me explain the significance of that. You know it, and as soon as I say it, you'll know it. You'll say I shouldn't have had to say it. But let me just bear with me a few moments. And I apologize for repeating something you already know, but I think it's an important thing to observe. Okay, 100% of the voters, but they don't all vote. So what if we get 50% who actually vote? Okay. And of those who win, half of those votes are won by, say, the Federalists, right? So we have a situation in which 25% of the country decides the future of our country. That's what the Electoral College did. That's what the alienation of voters does for us. And the wealthy count on it. And keep in mind that when people run for office in America, then and now, there is no translation of the issue during a campaign that's often a lie or misleading or a half-truth, how that could be a mandate for someone to be elected. And so when we say the public wanted something, two things have to happen. How do you confirm that they wanted that to happen? And two, if you do something else, how do you justify doing something else? Okay, so you get my precept here. Now, back in the 60s and the 70s, think of NOM, alienation. Think of Watergate, alienation. Myself and others would stand on street corners in Lower Manhattan looking through windows, hearing the hearings on the Hill involving the fall of Richard Nixon. The wealth seized the day. They got a majority of a reduced fraction of voters to govern, 25%, so they're taking care of themselves. Their game, then and now, is to run the bet on the Electoral College, to focus on them and to get that 25% of the vote, 1%, 0.5%, 1/4% more than the others. Our vote, you and I. Okay, you say, those are the rules. Well, the rules are so twisted, the game is so busted. And now we're talking about how do we draw lines to artificially give more power in a Congress to some people, because we draw the lines in such a way that a state, say Texas, who originally had so many, has so many more, and those new seats, they're Republican. That's not a fair election. So for folk like us who don't have the money, and I don't mean just you and I personally out of our own personal account, I'm talking about the mass of people that are that 26% of the total vote possible in America. We're in the short period there. And we're told there's no room at the end for citizens who are not themselves wealthy. That's what we have here. What about the war on poverty? We had general welfare, which is in the Constitution. We don't have any time for that because we'd rather war. NOM killed the war on poverty. We want peace, but years ago, up until now, we stockpile nuclear weapons and we discourage others from having it. The fight with Iran is we don't want Iran to have nuclear weapons, but Israel and America have it. How do you figure that out as a logical thing? Are we not as bad and proven as bad, say Israel, or us, United States, or Iran? So in 1984, when I ran for Congress, I felt very strongly about a nuclear freeze on nuclear armaments, and there was 78%. There was a very high proportion. That's not why I did it, but all of a sudden you look up, they take a poll, and you see that you're in that mess. They don't want that. The elite don't want that. They want these weapons. They make fortunes from these weapons. They have an old school mind of seizing land and property for themselves, not for us. Not for us. So for Trump and the new Republican elite, the wealthy want it all. They don't want to take care of the middle income people. They talk about it, but they don't want to do it. Everything they do, the tariffs to raise taxes, shield some people, make money for some, but not for you and I. Your weekly or daily grocery list is going to become more expensive. For some, it's already expensive. Holly and I are behind a truck that had steel, and we were talking, I guess that's going to cost more. And we discuss whether or not there's already an inventory here of these things. So you get an idea how the whole thing is slanted. So you take the money from the poor, you give a bunch to the wealthy, and you take the rest because we need an army to control them and perhaps to seize other territory, like Greenland, Canada. This is what we're dealing with here. You and I are on the wrong side of this curve. There's the capitalist and there's the community. And the community doesn't count for the capitalists. They don't care what they destroy. Drill, baby, drill. Smoke, suck it up. Smell it. Feel it. Watch your child get cancer because a pregnant woman has already imbibed a plastic can. It just goes on and on. So The change that the Republicans want harken back to the early days and what they were in the early days, which was thinner in the sense of who could participate. Weren't property, you couldn't vote. If you were a male and property, you could vote, but a woman couldn't vote. If you're a person of color, forget it. It's not going to happen. And so what are we upset about now? Oh, we don't want these aliens. We don't want people from any place. We want them to come from South Africa, but only the white people, not persons of color from there. So this is at the heart of it, what we're fighting about. And so listening to what they say is like missing what they're really doing and what they're all about. So the capitalist imbalance that is now no longer a blended class structure in which there was like a public deal. Yes, the wealthy get certain advantages, the middle class get certain jobs, those who are in a welfare class, we have transfer payments, so that we're in a civilized society. Standard of civilization is how you treat your own. So we have had, and when I say we, I mean you and I and voters who are not inside, meaning not so wealthy as that they have to deal with us, and the wealthy want to deal with it because they want to run the government to protect their investment in America. But their investment in America for us is just, we're slave labor, even if it's salary slave labor. That's what they have in mind. So you and I, we're not filthy rich, we're not in their formula. So what are we? We have become a permanent adversarial culture. This goes back to the 60s. You and I are probably in that culture. And you with the orange hat, well, maybe not you. And how does that group deal with it? Well, you'll see civil disobedience. You'll see protest. You'll see lawsuits. You'll see calls. You'll see hundreds of people sit outside the offices of some people who are not representing us, notwithstanding what we claim as a democracy and a republic, when we defy the rules at every opportunity they have to compromise us. So the Trump people, they want to run the table, if you will. They don't care about compromising human interests. They don't care to serve the Constitution that talks about promoting the general welfare. They are comfortable compromising us, lightening the tax load of the wealthy and taking the rest of the money and putting it into enforcement so that when we're upset, they can control us. So if they choose to do so, they can thumb their nose at us. And we, if we're not careful, will end up suffering the whims of the plutocrats. We can't rely on our elected officials because they tell us one thing, but if we were ever like a child and we look at them and we see how they act, we know not to listen to their words. You know, it's sort of like, I'm beating you up, but this is for your own good. You don't have no idea how much it hurts me to beat the hell out of you, to take away your rights, compromise what you can say, the freedom and liberty that you think is necessary so that you can have not just free speech, but you can have access in the voting machine for good government if you're not misled by all the lies that are told and the tricks that are done at the precincts and how lines are drawn. So that's our fight. And there is, and in recent days, I said this the other day, I feel like it's more like the Nixon period. There just seems to be a change in the body politic, and it's very interesting that we see people on TV commenting on, say, the Epstein matter and getting it all wrong, regularizing it. Oh yeah, we should talk to Maxwell. Let's see what she has to say. The prosecutor in the case didn't want to hear what she had to say. He knew what she was going to say. She was going to lie. She'll say anything to get out. And this is just, well, one very major incident because it seemed to tip the entire Republican House upside down. And so we find ourselves with some R's as part of a growing coalition. The Dems are becoming more certain. And independents are also moving away from Trump. So the lie that these guys are going to help us, that is Trump and company, forget it. That's ridiculous. That's not going to happen. We may not all want to go to advanced schools. We may not want to read the newspapers. We may not want to sully our hands with the politics of life. But if you don't, you'll be a victim of it. You'll be constrained in so many ways that we can't even imagine now. You want to go to France? You want to go to New Jersey? Before the kerfuffle with Putin was so obvious, my wife Holly and I, we went to Russia. And when you take a train from St. Petersburg to Moscow, they keep track of that. Not just us, the Russians as well. And to go there and stay there, you have to find an inn that invites you and have that proof to get it approved in the United States at the Russian embassy before you go there. Now, there are many more requirements. And when I've said to people, you know, we went there and they said, were you followed? I said, I wasn't. I said, you were followed. Now, I don't know. I don't have that level of paranoia. And I guess it goes back to my days as a prosecutor when everybody was going to supposedly do something with us. But if there's a time to take an accounting and know that these times are different than any other time, except the most dramatic and terrible times, Adams and his Sedition Act, how we treated people in the Civil War and since, voting rights, wars based on lies. You know, we've been through a lot, and it's ironic to me, just taking one, the Berrigan brothers protested in pretty dramatic ways, and one of them was to pour blood on the Secret Service cards, not Secret Service, the draft cards, pour blood on it as a symbol for what you would do. Hey, LBJ, how many children did you kill today? That was the kind of conversation that was going on. We have something like that now. We have a president who compromised so many people's lives because of the COVID thing. I guess he wanted people to go to work because he was concerned about the economics. He didn't care that you might get a deadly illness at whatever age. He didn't care about that. He just wanted people in there because he believed he'd only get elected if he had a certain level of business. And now we have him saber rattling around the world, and people wonder who we're going to bomb next. And someday is going to wake up and say, I'm not going to wait until they shoot at me, I'm going to shoot them. As a kid in the Bronx, my rule was, and these were not serious fights, but from time to time we'd have fights with each other. And one of the prefaces to the actual physical fight was one person or the other would say, in response, you know, one would say, I'm going to kick your ass. And the other person would say, oh yeah? And then the first person would say, oh yeah? And this would go back and forth. And my view was you get one oh yeah. If the other person says oh yeah, you immediately hit them. And an hour or so later, we were friends. That's the way it was. I'm not sure why we fought. And we had slap fights. But this is very different than what we have now. What we have are things that destroy people's lives, that destroy their notion of freedom and of liberty, neighbors that we care about, and a government that wants us all afraid, so afraid that we won't represent ourselves, fight for ourselves, and fight for the other people we care about. So I hope that this wandering discussion was helpful as my frame of reference helps you. And the directions continue to be the same. Resolute in opening your mouth and talking, writing letters to people, talking to those, doing what you can. It's not, there's no prescription and there's no guilt for not doing more than whatever you can do. But you do what you can do. And where you may find it surprising, but sometimes I'm in a room and somebody says something and I think, I don't know if I want to say something about that. And then I think, well, no, I don't want to just say something. I don't know if anybody else agrees. I don't want to just be upsetting. And so what I found over the years is the second or third time one of these things prods me, then I try to find an understated way to say it. And two things happen. One is I do affect the conversation, but people who disagree with me talk who are going to be silent as well. And I don't mean in a disrespectful way. I don't mean shouting. I don't mean gross disagreement. That is the miracle of the First Amendment. That conversation, and the conversation that is robust, that is the heart of freedom of speech. Because that's how we advance our civilization. That's how we secure our freedom. That's how we throw Trump out of the White House. So that's what I got to say. And tomorrow I expect to be walking if it's not raining or so hot. Bye-bye.